The Sony a6000, a favourite for content creators and an amazing entry point into photography and many people's first camera. Now we're in 2026, 12 years after its release, does this camera still cut it for photography, video and content creation? Let's take a look. If you've visited my channel before, you know that I've revisited this camera a lot of times over the years. And almost always I've recommended it as a budget camera. I've owned it myself for a long time now, not quite 12 years, but a long time. But I do find myself using it less and less each year. So is the time of the a6000 over? Let's find out. So in 2026, picking up an a6000 new is much more difficult than it should be. Mainly because the camera is no longer in production, so they're not making new copies of it. So you'll find lots of very expensive prices for such an old camera. For example, currently on Amazon, prices are all over the place, with hardly any actually new, with many refurbished ones there, and they're ranging from about $400 to $1,000, which is a crazy range. Even the bottom end of that range is too expensive. As my advice has been for many years now, the best way to find this camera at a price that makes sense is on the used market. So if you're willing to wait for a deal, you can often pick up an a6000 used with a kit lens for around $250 to $300, which is a much more reasonable price for this camera. But I would say not to pay too much more than that. So it is possible to find a reasonable one at this price, as you can see. But should you buy one in 2026, or are other options simply better now? Well, let's have a quick look at some of the things I still really like about the Sony a6000. On this camera, I've always really valued the mode select wheel on the top of the camera, rather than these options being buried in the menus. This makes swapping between aperture priority, shutter priority, and other modes way quicker. Also, this camera has an EVF, which is an electronic viewfinder, which is a big advantage for framing shots over just using the screen, especially in bright lights. These couple of features immediately make this camera stand out from other budget available options in the alpha range. For example, the Sony a5100, which is a similar age, doesn't have these two features, or even newer cameras like the ZV-E10 also doesn't have a shoot mode wheel or an EPF. And it goes without saying that the a6000 uses the E-mount lens system, which is great as there are so many lenses for all different types of shooting. For a first lens buying guide for the a6000 and other Sony cameras, check out this video here. And if you're enjoying this video, drop a like and a subscribe. And also, if you're watching on mobile, press the hype button below. It really does help me know what type of videos you guys like to see. Okay, so one of the main reasons it's still been really easy to recommend this camera over the last few years is its sensor. Sony has been stuck with basically the same 24.2 megapixel sensor for all similar sized APS-C cameras all the way up until 2023. So yes, while newer alpha cameras up until 2023 did have much better features, the sensor technology hadn't really moved on, making the images from the a6000 still comparable to newer cameras. So even though the camera came out in 2014, cameras up until 2023 were still using a very similar sensor. So this means that paired with a good lens, you could still get really good results for photography, and in fact still can. You can see from all of the example photos and videos that you've seen throughout this video, they have been exclusively taken on the a6000. So you can see what you can achieve with this camera. So yes, the picture quality is still very good, especially for photos. Pairing the a6000 with a better lens than the kit lens, for example, the Sigma 18 to 50mm f2.8, which I talk about quite a lot, means you can get sharp photos and massively outperforms alternatives from a similar era, and that includes modern smartphones. The video quality is admittedly starting to look a little older, not bad, but lacking compared to newer cameras. For video, there is of course no 4K, and the quality settings max out at 1080p at 60 frames per second, so there's also no 120 frames per second mode. Other things that are missing is that there are no picture profiles like S-Log and Cine, which you get on newer cameras. These types of picture profiles can really help enhance your video quality and have more flexibility in post-production. So they really are nice to have for creators, and the lack of them on the a6000 is definitely a downside. Obviously understandable for such an old camera, but they can be missed in the modern era. I'll swap now to the a6000 so you can see the video quality in comparison to the ZV-E10 Mark II. I'm using the same lighting setup and the same lens, the Sigma 15mm f1.4. So, as you can see, it's obviously not quite as good, but with good lighting and a good lens, the quality will still be fine for a lot of situations. It's worth noting that as the a6000 only records up to 1080p at 60 frames per second, that's what I'm using, compared to the ZV-E10 Mark II, which is recording in 4K. Okay, so a lot of features on the a6000 do feel a decade or more old. There's no touchscreen to focus on the screen. In fact, you can't control the menus or do anything with screen controls. A few other irritations are the articulating screen only flips up 90 degrees and not the full 180. So what this means is that you can't see yourself whilst vlogging or recording video without using an external monitor, which is quite frustrating. Also, the lack of audio jack for a microphone is a shame, as the onboard mics aren't the best quality and you'll need a separate audio source for decent audio for your videos. The Sony a6000 uses that 24.2 megapixel sensor, which has been upgraded on newer cameras such as the ZV-E10 Mark II, which I'm using to record this video. These newer cameras, which also include the Sony a6700, have a new 26 megapixel sensor, which is much improved in image quality. This sensor is the new standard for APS-C Sony cameras, and getting a ZV-E10 Mark II still costs around $1,000 with a lens, so obviously much more expensive. And talking again of lenses, the range of E-mount lenses you can get for Sony APS-C cameras is now huge. From Sony's own lenses to third-party lenses, there is an option for all different types of shooting. There are super sharp fixed focal length lenses like the Sigma 15mm f1.4, all the way to massive zooms like the Sony 70 to 350mm. There is a huge range to improve your shooting over the 16 to 50mm kit lens without upgrading the camera body. By itself, the kit lens isn't terrible, like many creators do say that it is, but you will get much better results with a better lens, such as the Sigma 18 to 50mm f2.8, which I mentioned earlier, which covers a similar zoom range to the kit lens, but is faster and has much improved low light performance. So in summary, yes, paired with the right lens, the a6000 is still a good camera for photography, which has good video quality and is still good enough for YouTube. But should you actually buy one in 2026? Well, if you want a beginner-friendly camera with a great range of lenses available, then it is still hard to go wrong with the a6000. Of course, it doesn't have 4K video and other fancy new features, but the image quality is still good enough. And that really is the most important thing. If you are on a very low budget and are willing to shop around, the a6000 is great. And if you already own an a6000, then I would say that it is still a great camera. I would definitely recommend upgrading your lenses first before buying a new camera body. And if you manage to pick one up used for $300 or less, then you have a great camera for travel, photography, and light video work. Are you still using your a6000 in 2026 and have got to the end of the video? Drop a camera emoji in the comments to let me know you're still watching. I still use mine in 2026, and it's still a fine choice if you don't want a bulky, expensive setup.